Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Python for Absolute Beginners series. In this episode, we're going to cover something called conditional statements. A conditional statement is something that essentially dictates the flow of code. We can use conditional statements by operators called logic operators. I briefly mentioned them in the last episode, but we're going to fully cover logic operators in this episode. So a logic operator is an operator that goes between two values to form an expression, and will cause this expression to evaluate as either true or false. In the last episode, I mentioned less than and greater than signs, and those are both logic operators. We've got 4 more to cover today, but they're all pretty self-explanatory. The first one is the equals condition. This one is exactly as it sounds, and it checks if two values are equal to one another, and you write it by writing double equal signs. It will always be double equal signs, and this is super important because this is a very different operator from the assignment operator that we covered last episode, which is just one equal sign. This expression will evaluate to true if two values are equal to each other. One example where this is true would be 10 equals 10. One example where this is false would be 7 equals 9, which is pretty self-explanatory. The next operator is the not equal condition, and this operator is the exact opposite of the equals condition, and it checks if two values are not equal to each other, so we write it by writing an exclamation point followed by an equal sign. This expression will evaluate to true if two values are not equal to each other. One example where this is true would be 8 not equal to 10. One example where this is false would be 10 not equal to 10, so also pretty self-explanatory. The next operator is the greater than sign, which we showed last episode. This operator checks if the first number is greater than the second number. If the first number is greater than the second number, this expression will evaluate to true. One example where this is true would be 5 greater than 3. One example where this is false would be 3 greater than 5. And the next operator is greater than or equal to. This is almost identical to the above condition, except it also checks whether or not the values might be equal. If the first number is greater than the second number, or the two numbers are equal, this expression will evaluate to true. We have the same examples for this one as the above one, but just keep in mind that the values could be equal and make it true. The next operator is less than, which you also saw in the last episode. This operator checks if the first number is less than the second number. If the first number is less than the second number, this expression will evaluate to true. One example where this is true would be 3 less than 5. One example where this could be false would be 5 less than 3. And the very last operator is less than or equal to. This operator again is very similar to less than, except it also checks if the values are equal. If the first number is less than the second number, or if the two values are equal, this expression will evaluate to true. Again, we'll use the same example for this one as the above one, but keep in mind that the values could also be equal and still be true. So now that you understand what the 6 logic operators are, let's go over how to actually use them. These operators become useful when you want to write statements called conditional statements that can control the logic flow of our code. So with conditional statements, we have 3 keywords that we're going to want to know, and I'll just comment these here. So we have if, we have elif, which just stands for else if, and then we also have else. And with these keywords, we use logic operators. So let's say we have a scenario. Let's say I want to run a block of code, but I only want to run it if 5 is less than 10. So let's check that. So let's space down 2 lines, and let's write if parentheses 5 less than 10. Now after the closing parentheses, type a colon, and then press enter. And then from here, we're going to type print 5 is certainly less than 10. Now let me explain what's going on here. So this if right here signifies a conditional statement, and it's going to check if whatever is inside of the parentheses is true. If what's inside is true, then we will run whatever code is indented underneath the if statement. A colon after the conditional statement lets the computer know that the very next line is going to be indented, and this is how Python organizes its code. If you forget a colon, or if you forget to indent, the computer is going to throw an error. In most Python editing environments like Google Colab, once you type a colon, the next line should automatically indent for you. But if it doesn't, just use the tab key to indent yourself. Now let's run this code to see what actually happens. So if we run it, and we'll give it just a second, you'll see that it prints out 5 is certainly less than 10. So we wrote that if 5 is less than 10, then we're going to print out this statement. And 5 is certainly less than 10, so this evaluates as true, so this piece of code is ran. And we can actually put as many lines under an if statement or any conditional statement as we want. So say I wanted to print more things under here, like print blah blah blah, and then I'll print something else. I'll just say print still inside if statement, and then I run it again, it's going to run all these, because as long as these are indented underneath the conditional statement, it's going to tell the computer that we're still inside the if statement. But when we want to get out of the if statement, we're going to unindent. So let's unindent here, and let's just print now we are outside of the if block. And if you'll run it, you'll see all 4 of these will print, but just know that this 4th one here prints outside of the if statement and not inside of it. So let's test something then. If we change this if statement to say if 5 is greater than 10, then this block of code with this if statement isn't going to run at all. And why? Because the expression inside of our conditional statement, this 5 greater than 10, is not true. And a conditional statement is only going to run if this piece of code right here is true. So if we run it, you'll see that it's only going to print now we are outside of the if block. Because basically what happens is we hit this line, we say, hey, is 5 greater than 10? No. So we skip all this code because it's inside the if statement, and we instead just go to this line of code. Instead of just using 2 random numbers like 5 and 10, let's use what we learned last episode to implement some variables. So let's make 2 new variables up here. Let's make x equals 5, and then we'll make y equals 8. So let's go back into this if here, and then replace the condition with x less than y. And we're going to go ahead and delete this code here. And we're just going to print out x is certainly less than y. So what do you think is going to happen here? So we have x equals 5 and y equals 8, which means that x should be less than y, so this line of code should run. And if we run it, we'll see that it does in fact run. Where if statements become powerful is when you combine them with elif and else statements. Elif just stands for else if, and it basically means if the first condition isn't met, let's check this other condition instead. So below our current if statement, let's make a new line and unindent to let the computer know that we're outside of this block. And let's write elif parentheses x greater than y, and we'll type a colon and then press enter, and then we're going to write a print statement that says it appears x is greater than y. Now if this first statement isn't run, this elif statement will say, hey, let's try this condition instead. So in our case, we're first checking if x is less than y. If it is, we'll enter this block of code. If it isn't, we're going to keep moving and check this elif statement, and if this is true, then we'll enter this block of code. So let's change our variables around here so that we trigger the second elif block. So let's say x equals 10 and y equals 6. And now if we press run, you'll see it prints out it appears x is greater than y. You can actually have as many elif blocks as you want, so let's change the conditions of our variables. Let's just look at the x variable. So in our first statement, let's change x less than y to say x equals 7. In our elif statement, let's change this just to say x equals 9. And we're just going to change the text here. For the if statement, we're going to say now inside if statement. And then for the elif, we're going to say now inside first elif statement. And then we can make another elif block. So let's make 2 more actually. So I'm going to copy this and just paste it. So now we've got a couple of elif blocks, and let's change the conditions of these. So let's change, let's say this one to x equals 5. And then finally, we want this elif block to trigger. So we're going to set this to x equals 10, because we know we set x equal to 10 up here. So we'll say this is the second elif block, and this is the third elif block. So what's going to happen here is if we run it, it'll say now inside third elif statement, because what we're doing is we're going to the first if statement. We're saying is x equal to 7? No, it's not. So go to the next elif. Is x equal to 9? No. So we skip that. Is x equal to 5? No. So we skip that again. And then we say is x equal to 10? And actually, yes, it is equal to 10. So we're going to enter this block of code and then print out now inside third elif statement. The last conditional statement word we need to know is else. So else basically runs if everything else has not been met. So it's basically like a default. It says, hey, all the conditional statements that came before me have failed to execute, so let's run whatever is in my code chunk. An else statement has to come after an if or an elif, as it wouldn't really make sense to have an else statement just sitting by itself. And unlike elif, there can only ever be one else statement in a continuous series of conditional statements. So in the example that we have currently, let's add an else statement at the very bottom. Let's say else, and then we're going to print the value of x could not be found. And notice that the else doesn't take in any parentheses or parameters here like the other ones, because it's a default, so it's just going to trigger if nothing else does. So we don't need anything like this inside the else statement. So let's change the conditions here so that we actually do enter the else statement. So instead of having this elif statement say x equals 10, let's say x equals 12. So now we're going to go through all of our conditions. We're going to say, is x equal to 7? Nope. Is it equal to 9? No. Is it equal to 5? No. Is it equal to 12? No. And because nothing else has been triggered, now we're going to enter this else statement. So if we run this, it's going to print the value of x could not be found. The most common combinations of conditionals, at least in my experience, are either just one if statement by itself, one if statement followed by an else statement, or one if statement, one elif statement, and one else statement. Although sometimes you may need to use multiple elif statements. One of the really cool things you can do with conditional statements in Python is having multiple logic operators. So in all of our examples here, every conditional statement has only one expression inside the parentheses. Let's say, however, we want one of our blocks to check for multiple conditions. Let's say in our first if statement, we want to see if x is equal to 5 or if x is greater than 7. And we can actually do just that by writing the or keyword. So like this, let's say x equals 5 or x greater than 7. And the or keyword makes it so that if either of the expressions are true, the conditional will run. So in this case, x is not equal to 5, but it is greater than 7, so we're going to run this conditional block, and it's going to print now inside if statement. And we also have the and keyword. The and keyword makes it so that both of the conditions have to be true. So if we do x equals 5 and x is greater than 7, this is not going to run, because even though x is greater than 7, it is not equal to 5, so the and operator does not let this code run. So if we run this, we'll see that it again defaults to the else block. So let's do a little bit more practice. I want to set up a little testing program here that allows you to easily test how these conditional statements work. So I'm going to delete everything. I'm going to delete all this. I'm going to clear out the output. I'm just going to make sure we have a fresh notebook here to work with. And I'm going to make a new variable called, let's just say, user number. And I'm going to assign it to input, parentheses, quotations, enter your number here. Now, input is a built-in function in Python that basically captures input from the user. And whatever is inside of the parentheses, in our case, enter your number here, is displayed to the user when the user is prompted for the input. So once the user types in their number and presses enter, we capture that input. And in our case, I want to assign that input to a variable I just made up called the user number. So I'll show you how this works. And actually, let's make another statement here where we're going to print out whatever the user entered. So if I press run, there's going to be a little text box that shows up here. So it says enter your number here. And let's say I want to say 59. And then I press enter. It's going to capture that and store that value inside user number. And then it's just going to print that out. So this is where our conditional statements are going to come in. So let's say we have a conditional that checks what the letter grade of our user score is. So let's write a conditional flow that prints out a certain line of text depending on what the user enters. So we're going to assume a grading scale that 90 to 100 is an A, 80 to 89 is a B, 70 to 79 is a C, 60 to 69 is a D, and anything below 60 is an F. So let's write this below and just follow along with my code here. So I'm going to make 2 lines under here. I'm just going to say if user number greater than equal to 90 and user number less than equal to 100. And if this is true, I'm just going to print out you have scored an A. And what this is saying is if whatever number the user inputs is greater than or equal to 90, and it's less than or equal to 100, meaning it's in the range 90 to 100, then we're going to print out that they have scored an A. And let's make some other statements to check for the other letter variables. So let's make Elif user number greater than or equal to 80 and user number less than or equal to 89. And then we're just going to print you have scored a B. And then I'm just going to copy and paste some of these down to make it a little easier. Make sure this is unindented. We're going to print these, and then we should have 5-letter grades because we have A, B, C, D, and F. So we'll have this one say between 70 and 79, and then this one is 60 and 69, and then this one for F should say if it's greater than or equal to 0 and less than or equal to 59. And then, oh, there's a little typo here. Let me change these. So they're lowercase. And then we'll change the text within each of these. So we have this block here should represent scoring an A. This is getting a B. This is getting a C. So let's change this to C. We'll change this little face here. And then we have another Elif statement for D. So we'll say you have scored a D. And then we'll say you have scored an F. So the conditions we've written in here should check all the numbers from 0 to 100. But what if the user enters something that isn't between 0 and 100 or is in some like invalid value? So let's write an if or an else statement, at the bottom here. That's a default. That's going to say you entered an invalid number. And basically what this is going to do is in each of these, we're going to say, okay, is it between 90 and 100? That's an A. 80, 89, B. 70, 79, C. 60, 69, D. And then between 0 and 59 is an F. And then if for some reason the number wasn't caught in any of these, we're just going to say that, hey, the user entered an invalid value. Okay, so I want to go ahead and run a couple of tests here. So let's go ahead and run this. And it'll prompt us to enter a number. Let's say we want to have somebody score a D. So let's put in 64 and we're going to press enter. Oop, it looks like we got an error here. Oh, okay, I see what happens. So this, I guess this input statement here, when it captures the user input, it's actually storing my input as a string and not an integer. So to get around that, we can actually wrap this in the int little function here. That basically will just convert what our input is to an integer. So let's try running it now. It should fix that. Let's do 64 again. And yep, it'll say you have scored a D. And then let's just run a couple of tests here. Let's say, hey, somebody scored an 87. What should that be? That should be a B, right? So we say 87, press enter, you have scored a B. Let's check for an A. Let's say they scored 98. You have scored an A. Let's check the bounds here. So let's check 100 and 0. So 100 should be an A, right? Yep, so you've scored an A. Let's check if they scored 0. 0 should be an F. Yep, you have scored an F. And then we also want to check our else statement. So let's say the user enters 16,547. Now that's not a valid grade, obviously. So what's going to happen is it should trigger this else statement because it's not within any of these ranges here. So we do that and it says you have entered an invalid number. Let's try another invalid number. Let's say 135 and I'll run that invalid number. And then you can just keep testing this as much as you want. So if you want on your own time, you can make a copy of this code here. If you want to just mess around with these conditional statements, it can kind of give you a good idea of how these statements actually execute. But one more time, we'll just say we want to get a C. Enter your number here. Let's enter 76. Press enter. You have scored a C. Okay, so by this point, you should have a reasonably strong understanding of conditional statements in Python. In this video, we learned what logic operators are, what if, elif, and else statements are, and how we can use these all to control the flow of code in our program. I'm going to link a couple of resources in the description below if you're still struggling to understand the concepts behind this video. Next video we'll go over data variable types that can hold multiple pieces of data instead of just one like the types we've learned so far. Take care everyone, and I'll see you for the next video.